Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Your Movie Rocks, an alternate ending podcast where all movies are great movies.
Even the bad ones?
Especially the bad ones. So I am your host, Mandy Albert, and this is a little bit of a pinch me, I'm dreaming moment because it was always a little bit of a dream of mine to be on an alternate ending podcast, and now after being on many of them, I get one of my own, and I still can't get over how cool this is.
Oh, I'm so glad you think it's cool. I'm like, I hope she's not offended that
Are
Brendan
you
and I
kidding?
asked her
This
to
is
host.
so cool. So anyway, my guest this month needs no introduction, but I'll introduce him anyway. Because it's Tim. It's Tim Brayton. How you doing, Tim?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I will share with the world what I believe I've suggested to you and I've said to other people as well. It felt, because you know you and your husband did that Star Trek podcast. So this is a metaphor I know you'll appreciate. Much in the same way that only Jean-Luc Picard could assign Benjamin Sisko to Deep Space Nine, I feel like I had to be your first guest. So thank you for
absolutely
indulging
did.
me.
Yeah, no, you totally did. So because this is our first outing, and I hope everybody hasn't run away once they realize that this is mainly going to be me, but let me tell you a little bit, everybody, about how the show is going to work. So, every show, my guest, in this case Tim, is going to assign me a movie to watch, and we're going to talk about the movie, just like the 10,000 other movie podcasts that you have listened to, except that there is a catch, which is that no matter what I thought, I am only allowed to say nice things about the movie in question. My guests can say whatever they want, but me, only nice things, and furthermore, it has to be only sincere nice things, not things like, I loved how stupid Jared Leto looked in his Paolo Gucci makeup. If I can't say something nice, too bad, because I have to come up with something. So, Tim has assigned me a movie, I have watched the movie, Tim has watched the movie, now we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to love it no matter what.
I do want to just bring in a point of order. What if I sincerely love how stupid Jared Leto looks in his Paolo Gucci makeup, and indeed that is to me one of the chief strengths of that film?
It's a gray area. It just has to be non-ironic love, I think is the
I
key.
think I non-ironically love Jared Leto in House of Gucci.
I do, in fact, think I non-ironically love Jared Leto in House of Gucci. I'm not sure I non-ironically love his makeup.
Okay, that is a fair distinction. The difference between do I ironically love this or not is one that I sometimes wrestle with, including an ongoing love affair with the movie Xanadu that I don't know if that love is ironic or not. So.
That's a tricky one, because I feel like my love for that movie is not as ironic as it should be.
I feel the same, but that is not. We are not here to talk Xanadu.
We are
It's
not here to
the
talk
movie
about Xanadu.
that I brought. Shall I tell the folks?
Yes,
what
so
movie that I
Tim,
brought
why
for you?
don't you tell everybody about the movie that you have assigned me, and a little bit about the movie and why you assigned it to me.
Absolutely. So the movie I have assigned to you this month is the 2011 Zack Snyder fantasy fetish epic Sucker Punch. Film, in case you've forgotten, it's been a few years, in which Emily Browning, who used to be someone they were trying to make happen and it kind of stopped, and it kind of stopped in part because of this film. Emily Browning plays a character only known in the film as Baby Doll, who got into a scrape with her stepfather, a very pernicious, wicked, abusive man who has attempted to engineer essentially inheritance fraud after Baby Doll and her sister. Their mother has been murdered by the stepfather, so he has come up with a scheme to get the daughters out of the way. Baby Doll, in trying to save her sister, inadvertently leads to her sister's demise, and then herself ends up in an insane asylum. The bulk of the movie does not take place in that layer of reality. It takes place in a layer of reality where Baby Doll is fantasizing that the asylum is in fact some sort of Belle Epoque brothel, where she is dancing for the pleasure of various disgusting men. And further, there is a layer of fantasy where when she dances, she kind of creates these worlds. I don't know how to put it beyond that. We'll talk about those worlds. That's mostly what there is to talk about in the case of this movie. So I picked this movie for a couple reasons. One is that I knew you would want to start this show off with a challenge of a movie that is somewhat notoriously god-awful. This movie in 2011 was received with just the most violent hatred, 22% on Rotten Tomatoes, just wave of critic after critic, including myself in 2011, not merely expressing that the film was bad, but expressing that the film's existence was an affront to the art form in a way, that it just creating Sucker Punch was a moral failure. They have desired to create it was a moral failure. So I wanted to pick something that was really deep down notorious. I wanted to make this something that you had to work for. And the other reason I chose it is because I myself, as I said, in 2011, I wrote a pretty knives out, hostile review. I have nothing nice to say about the film in my 1-star review from the.
You've changed a lot since 2011.
I've changed a lot since 2011. I was already becoming the person I am, but I think this was also the point in my life when I still disliked Speed Racer. I don't think I had my come to Jesus moment with the Wachowskis quite yet. I think that happened. Actually, it was with Cloud Atlas, which was 2 years later.
Oh, okay.
So in a way, yes, 2013 is kind of the moment where I had something break in my brain, and it was Cloud Atlas that broke it. And I have felt that I owed Sucker Punch another viewing, especially because I have become not a Zack Snyder apologist. I think that I would need to like more of his films more than I do to say that. I really admire Batman versus Superman, and that is an insane movie to really admire. So I feel like I have the spirit of a Zack Snyder apologist, even if I'm not specifically such a thing. Like, I still haven't seen his Star Wars knockoffs on Netflix. But I did want to revisit the film, so I'm actually going to somewhat issue myself the same challenge that you've given to yourself with this entire podcast series. I am going to accentuate the positive.
Well, isn't this just going to be a nice little love
We're
fest?
We're just gonna be
here.
So happy talking about how nothing is wrong with the movie Sucker Punch.
It's going to be great. Like, one of the reasons that I wanted to do this for the podcast in the first place is that I have come to kind of a theory of movie criticism for myself, if not for anybody else, which is that I really enjoy watching other people hate things. Like, come on, I am only human. I ate up your Mufasa review just like everybody else did. But I prefer liking things, especially things that other people don't like. Like, that to me is a more fun exercise than the other way around, which is hating things that other people like.
Well, it's better for the soul.
It is, that's true. And anyway, I loved this movie. I'm going to say that no matter what. That's always going to be the start off, but I loved this movie. I was surprised by how much I love this movie because here's my general feelings towards Zack Snyder. They don't exist. I have seen, I think, 2 other Zack Snyder directed movies. One of them was Dawn of the Dead, which is fine, and one of them is Watchmen, which I hated. And aside from that, that's my Zack Snyder experience.
Okay.
So I don't really have any feelings towards him or his oeuvre for the most part. I was completely unaware of Sucker Punch when it came out. 2011 was a period in my life when I just wasn't watching a lot of movies, and definitely a movie like this would not have come across my radar even if I had been watching a lot of movies, to be honest. But I loved this, and the first thing that I loved was the opening 5 to 6 minute prologue, which you kind of narrated the events of when you were giving the synopsis of the movie. It's the part before Baby Doll gets committed to the insane asylum. And it's basically like, it's a completely dialogue-free 6-minute, almost dream sequence feeling, set to a slowed-down cover that I believe is done by Emily Browning herself of the Eurythmics' Sweet Dreams. And you see, the death of the mother and the tussle with the stepfather that results in the sister's death, and the stepfather discovering the will, and Baby Doll being actually taken to the insane asylum. And I was really digging that entire sequence. I love the way that it's shot. I love the way that it's lit. I love the way that it frames Emily Browning's face. I'm going to continue to love the way that the movie frames Emily Browning's face and faces in general. I love how immediately disgusting the stepfather is. Like, he's in the movie for maybe 5 minutes, but man, are they a good 5 minutes. And I love how it sets the stakes for things.
I co-sign, and I feel probably before too long should clarify. You and I both watched the extended cut.
Yes.
Not the director's cut. The director's cut of this film has never been released. Zack Snyder is still very anxious that one day it might. But we did watch the extended cut. So, I hadn't seen the film in 14 years. My memory is that the prologue is not this long.
I was going to say, you would have seen the original version of it.
I saw the
theaters,
PG-13 right? Theatrical cut that runs to 109 minutes. The version
it's
we watched.
PG-13
It's
too.
PG-13.
Oh, interesting.
That was one of the things that changed.
Oh.
So I will start by saying I love that I love that the extended cut is...
Not the director's cut.
Is definitely giving more space for the movie to find itself and to unfold. And I think I agree with you. The opening longish prologue is really nice and drawn out. I like that it's moody. I like that it's not rushing the song. And I like that it is capable of being wordless storytelling, even though, and I think this is one of the things that would not have been present in the director's cut that has yet to exist. I think the narration doesn't need to be there because the images are telling us the story we need, and I think the images plus the song would be doing a really great job of that. So I love that this has that kind of runway to really go nice and slow. And I'm actually going to start even earlier than you, because I'm going to say the first thing that I love about this movie, present in the studio logos, which because this is a Warner Brothers film. Warner's has been always very good about letting filmmakers kind of screw around with the logo, or at least they were in those Halcyon pre-Zaslav days. I love that Zack Snyder wanted to remake Moulin Rouge, which is really obviously what he's doing. It opens in a theater with a red curtain upon which the Warner logo is projected.
I have Moulin Rouge written several times in my notes here, so I'm glad we both landed in that place.
And if I can take one step beyond, one of the other reasons I love the extended cut, the theatrical cut, I do not remember a lot of the details, but I do remember that it did not have that early musical sequence, Love is the Drug.
It didn't?
It didn't.
Oh my god, that's a crime. That's one of the best things in the movie.
That was, I think, held off until the end credits, where it still appears in the theatrical, the extended cut.
Okay, but nobody's going to stick around to see that in the credits.
Exactly. And so I'm moving a little bit further ahead, but I do think having that come really, really early in the extended cut clarifies what the movie wants to be. So that plus the Moulin Rouge opening curtain, I think those two things both happening in the first 10 minutes of the film really make it clear what kind of experience Sucker Punch wants to be in a way that I do not recall the theatrical cut being. And that, to me, is a huge shift towards why I think I responded to this movie better.
Very much so. I'm actually going to push back at you a little bit about the opening narration. I do like that it's there. I don't necessarily know that it needs to be there, but I like that it is there. And we will get into, assuming that I remember, why I like that it is there a little bit later. But yeah, Moulin Rouge I was definitely thinking of. There were a lot of movies that I was thinking of, all generally positive comparisons as we were going through this. I also had at one point Repo the Genetic Opera written down. Like, completely different vibe, obviously. But at the same time, like, I don't know, the mood felt similar in a lot of ways. The mood and the camera work, and also just the overall, like, sincerity and clear love for what the filmmakers were doing, I think was what made me think of Repo. And if
I get that. I was gonna say, I think like the sort of making a musical out of like a sort of vaguely 50s coded medical horror film.
Yes,
I think is part of what I the vibe that I would. That's what I'm hearing, at least. I had not thought of.
Also, some of the costuming, I think, as well.
Sure.
And how even when they're in the mental asylum, the things that they are wearing are not things anybody would ever wear in any environment in real life. And so I think the fact that the costuming just took you so much out of any semblance that this took place in our reality was one of the other things that reminded me of Repo. And if we want to get very contemporary, it also kind of reminded me a little bit of 13-time Oscar nominee Emilia Perez, which I saw fairly recently, and which has a similar throw absolutely everything at the wall and see what nonsense remains kind of vibe to it.
I like that comparison, and I don't know where you landed on Emilia Perez.
I liked it.
I would actually.
I didn't think it was good, but I liked it.
That's fair. That's as we have just said. That is your brand.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I would actually go to bat for Sucker Punch as being more successful at what both films are kind of doing in terms of just like, let's make everything happen all at once and have it be a musical while that's all going on. In that, I think Zack Snyder has a better sense of what is visually interesting about bodies in choreographed movement than Jacques Audiard has.
Yeah, that's fair. Because this is an incredibly well choreographed film.
And I mean, certainly, as I said, having "Love Is the Drug" reinstated into the beginning, I think that is the best number here. It's the only number. There's a lot of music being timed to the action in this film, but there's only one quote unquote musical number.
Yes, and it's definitely the movie at its Moulin Rouge-iest. That's not a phrase a human tongue can say. Moulin Rouge-iest.
I feel like that is. Since it's not a concept the human brain should be able to conceive of, it makes sense that the human tongue cannot say it.
Indeed.
But I think that is a really well choreographed number, in the way that dance numbers can be well choreographed.
It's so good, and it's really well sung too. Mm-hmm. That's actually Oscar Isaac and Carla Gugino, right?
Pretty sure. Also, had completely forgotten that this is probably the first thing I ever saw Oscar Isaac in, and
oh wow.
Wow, baby Oscar Isaac in this movie in 2011.
He's so young.
I have just looked it up. That is not true. I saw him in multiple things before this. Clearly, he just didn't land in my brain until I saw Inside Llewyn Davis.
I frequently don't recognize him. I don't know. He's got one of those faces that bounces off my brain, and I think he's Pedro Pascal.
Interesting. He's much better than Pedro Pascal.
I mean, sure, but
don't tell the internet.
He's very, very good in this.
Yes.
He's despicable, and he's clearly having a great time being despicable. And he gets to be despicable in so many different ways too. Speaking of actors that I'm always delighted to see, I almost squealed in delight when Gina Malone showed up.
Yes, she's an actor who I don't always like her performance, but I always I think she's kind of like a moth who's attracted to projects that do certain kinds of weird, messed up things in ways that I like things to be weird and messed up.
I believe it.
And she's always matching the energy of the film around her.
Very much so.
So she's a good augur, I guess I would say.
That's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah, so Gina Malone plays a character named Rocket, and she is one of the little posse of girls in this insane asylum who become kind of baby dolls. I don't want to say sidekicks, and Zack Snyder would very much not like it if I said sidekicks, but becomes kind of one of baby doll's little band of sisters, and their goal throughout the large part of the film is to escape from this insane asylum. They have been, or rather Baby Doll has been informed in one of many dream sequences that she needs to find 5 MacGuffins in order to escape from the insane asylum, and has recruited this little band of girls to help her track down and steal those MacGuffins so that they can all get out of there. And Rocket is kind of she's kind of the second in command of the group, or at least seems to be for a while, because she's the most enthusiastic about carrying out this plan. And Gina Malone just eats this role up. Mm-hmm. It's so good. Every time I'm interrupting myself here, but the makeup in this movie is also so good.
Hair and makeup are phenomenal.
Emily Browning actually looks like a doll. You want to talk about a character who fits their name here, and who never has another name. They have made her up to look like a porcelain doll. She looks like she's going to topple over and break any second.
It's very much the case, and apparently the person that Snyder wanted for that role was Amanda Seyfried, and her schedule didn't have room for it. But
I don't think it would have worked as well.
I don't think it would have, because Emily Browning has a really, I don't want to say a weird face, but it is a weird face. She has those eyes right? And that's why she's so easy to buy as like a sort of porcelain doll, because her eyes are huge.
She looks a little like Ariana Grande from the Uncanny Valley. Or maybe Ariana Grande is the Uncanny Valley version of her.
You know, I can say that. To me, it reminds me sort of Emma Stone, who was apparently actually also offered a role in this movie. She was going to play the Jamie Chung character.
Oh, interesting.
And had to drop out for scheduling reasons. I feel like having both Emma Stone and Emily Browning in the same film would have been too much, because they both have that same sort of like round face.
It would have been too much eyeball.
It would have been too much eyeball. Exactly.
Yeah,
and this was also before I had a sense of who Emma Stone was, so I would have gotten them confused constantly when I was talking about the movie.
Fair enough. Yes, honestly, during some of the action sequences, I did have trouble keeping track of who was who, though it didn't really bother me that much because it didn't matter all that much. Mm-hmm. So yes, Gina Malone though. The camera loves Gina Malone's face, and the camera especially loves Gina Malone's face here. Mm-hmm. And it also loves her hair. I was really glad that she went short for this particular movie.
Yeah, I was going to say, you talk about the great porcelain makeup to make Emily Browning look like a doll. The like pointy ginger pixie cut that Gina Malone has is working splendidly.
It is spectacular. Even though I just said that I sometimes had trouble telling them apart, I'm going to backtrack on that just a little bit right now and say that one of the things I loved, especially when we got into the fantasy action sequences, was how distinct each of the 5 kind of main girls are. Because in addition to Baby Doll and Rocket, we also have Sweet Pea, who is Rocket's older sister, who's played by Abby Cornish, who's kind of like the reluctant hero of the group. Like, she's the one who kind of has to be dragged into it. She's also much taller than all of the rest of them, which helps us tell her apart from them. And then there are Amber and Blondie, who are played by Vanessa Hudgens, of all people I didn't expect to see in a movie like this, and Jamie Chung. And Zack Snyder is really good at using all of their movement talents in different ways. So kind of the plot, once we get into the fantasy sequences, is that Baby Doll is like an exceptionally hypnotic dancer, or at least the version of Baby Doll that lives in the level of reality that is the brothel run by Oscar Isaac, is an exceptionally hypnotic dancer who can get like any man who is watching her dance to pay attention to her and nothing but her. And so that's how they're going to steal all of the stuff that they need for their escape plan. And the funny thing is, we never actually see Baby Doll dance, because it entirely takes place in these crazy fantasy sequences. And when we say crazy fantasy sequences, we are talking about crazy fantasy sequences, like trench warfare during World War I.
But not just trench warfare during World War I. It's trench warfare that turns into a battle against steampunk robot Nazi zombies.
Yes, steampunk robot Nazi zombies. There's previously a battle in, like, kind of vaguely a Buddhist temple that also involves fighting, like, 50-foot tall golems or something like that.
Yeah, like giant stone samurai.
Yes, giant stone samurai. And then later on there is a storming of a castle and a slaying of a dragon and a slaying of a baby dragon also. But yeah, there's a lot of movie going on here. There are 3 or 4 different movies happening at any given time. And what I was actually meaning to say with all that is that in all of these sequences, Zack Snyder knows how to use all of these actresses' bodies incredibly well. And I mean that in a far less, like, sleazy way than it's going to sound, because I do know a little bit of the movie's reputation. But just, he has a really good sense of all of their dance and movement talents and where they will best serve things. And I saw this especially with Vanessa Hudgens, who, again, like, when she showed up, I was kind of like, oh, that's not something I was expecting. I don't think I really know her from much outside of High School Musical. But because of the background that she has in musical theater dancing, her choreography looks like musical theater dancing. And it's really cool, especially when it's used for these fight scenes. Also, and I was not necessarily expecting to say this, especially considering my feelings towards Watchmen, I really loved the needle drops here, for the most part.
The needle drops work extraordinarily well, and I do think that it's a conspicuous weakness with Watchmen, but I think it's more of a strength in his other films. Like, I'd say it's a strength for sure in Dawn of the Dead. There's a sense in which the three big action set pieces, or the four big action set pieces, I guess I should say, are each, in a way, kind of being pitched as this music video, generally to a really slowed down, like, techno version of various songs. And they're not musical numbers, which is why I kind of interrupted myself earlier, but the song is used kind of in the underscore. It's used as punctuation, so when we hear the lyrics come back in, it's usually because there's some major narrative development in the action fantasy sequence. Really, I mean, it is structured basically around these four big music sequences. And again, I can't call them musical numbers exactly, but I do think that in a way it works better than most films that just have kind of random needle drops, because they are woven into the fabric of the script.
They are basically music videos.
Yeah.
Strung together to make a movie.
Exactly. And I think it works very well. I think it's quite an interesting way to create this very heightened fantasy trip through genres that Zack Snyder likes, which is ultimately what the film is it's kind of, he's taking all of these movies, like you said, it's a bunch of movies. Well, it's a bunch of specific movies, ones that Zack Snyder wishes he'd made.
Yep.
I think. And he's taking, a glob here of some Star Wars, and then he's mixing it up with some Lord of the Rings. Then he's taking a big scoop of Saving Private Ryan, and he's making...
There's even an orc battle.
There's an orc battle. And so he's making these, like, giant pile-ups of just every movie, and I forget where I got onto that track, so I don't remember where I was taking it, but I find it very exciting, the quantity of movie just being flung at my eyeballs in these sequences.
It's very true. I also love how much of it is done without dialogue. Yes. We already talked about the opening sequence, but that is not the only dialogue or almost dialogue-free sequence.
Yeah, there's very little speech in this movie There's very little speech in this movie, but there's very little that needs to be said. Mostly this is being done through just the physical movement, as you said, and sort of the switching between sequences. Most of the required dialogue is the exposition being delivered by Scott Glenn, I would say. And I think that is a canny choice, because I think that Zack Snyder is not necessarily a great director of actors. I think he has assembled for himself not necessarily a great cast. So he is easing the pressure on everybody for him to have to be able to direct, say, Vanessa Hudgens to deliver complicated dialogue by really not having any.
I think I would not be surprised to learn that the bulk of the movie's non-expository dialogue is delivered by Oscar Isaac. And
that second
place is probably Carlo Gugino, and those are good choices.
Mm-hmm. No, the people who are required to do the most acting rather than the most movement are the best actors. Scott Glenn, Oscar Isaac, and Carlo Gugino.
Yes, so good choices there. This is a really random little detail, but it was something that stuck out to me. I loved the number of shots of shoes.
Interesting,
and specifically of the women's shoes. It almost felt like Zack Snyder was calling my attention to how silly their shoe choices are for the things that they're about to be doing. Because it's almost one of those silly tropes at this point. Like, why are you going into combat wearing 12-inch stilettos? And nobody is wearing 12-inch stilettos here, but they are wearing wildly impractical shoes. And the movie draws your attention, or at least drew my attention, to the fact that they are wearing throughout this wildly impractical shoes. Cool shoes.
I hadn't really caught that specifically, but I like that. And I think it ties into what the film is trying to do, I think, which I assume we'll get to. I don't...
Yes.
Yeah.
We certainly will. So I'm curious, how many times did you laugh over the course of this movie?
I wasn't counting. I certainly grinned a lot during this movie because it's fun.
Yeah.
There's a lot of big, crazy nonsense. I think, did I specifically have a laughter response to, say, again, the Clockwork Steampunk zombie Nazis? I don't think I laughed, but my heart was laughing.
That's fair. There was exactly one moment when I laughed out loud, and that was at the end of actually a fairly tense and dour scene, and it was when Oscar Isaac tosses away the gun that he has just used to shoot both Amber and Blondie, and declares, "I hate guns."
I mean, it's also I watch this alone in my house, so like I don't laugh at movies that I watch alone in my house.
Oh, interesting. That's when I laugh at movies. Also, did Zack Snyder learn how to do a sex scene? Or at least a love scene? Since Watchmen?
I mean, it would be hard for any director to do 2 sex scenes as bad as the one in Watchmen.
Because that might be the worst sex scene I've ever seen.
It's in the running. It's for sure in the running.
And yet, the scene near the end of this, between Emily Browning and John Hamm, is so good. Like, it's not even actually a sex scene. It's more like the lead up to what you think is going to be a sex scene. And I am also led to believe that this is not in the theatrical cut of the
I don't
movie.
remember it, certainly.
And now my question is just like, why did they cut all of the great things from the theatrical cut of the movie? So the...
I mean, one can speculate maybe he was grumpy that he had to cut it down, and so he kind of sabotaged it.
That feels like a very Zack Snyder thing to do.
It does.
Honestly. So this scene occurs towards the end of the movie. The kind of overarching plot that gives it the stakes up to this point is that Baby Doll is going to be lobotomized 5 days after she enters the insane asylum. The paperwork is all taken care of, and signatures have been forged, and cover-ups have been staged, and anyway, a doctor is coming to lobotomize her. So this has been reframed in the brothel level of reality as a patron of the brothel, nicknamed the High Roller, has basically made a bid on her virginity, and is coming to take it away in 5 days. And towards the end of the movie, for various thematic reasons, Baby Doll basically resigns herself to her fate in both levels of reality, which means that the High Roller comes in the brothel level, and she wakes up in a bed and he's there. And then what we actually see of the two of them is them like having a conversation where he explains that what he really wants is to kind of get to know her in that moment. Like, he absolutely wants to have sex with her, but before doing so, he wants it to be a sincere experience between the two of them. And it basically takes us through the moments of seduction, and it doesn't at all, like, it's been a lead up to something that you think is going to be really horrible and traumatic and sleazy for her. And then it's one of the very gentlest moments of a movie that has not at all been gentle up to that point.
And it's definitely, I don't remember exactly how this is put together in the theatrical cut. It is different. Like, that's the most significant narrative difference between the films, I think, is sort of how the ending is framed. And it is getting at that gentleness that you're talking about and trying to make this less of a horror movie type finale. And I think it got there. I certainly found the end very, very, very pleasant. Not pleasant.
The end's quite
It's
uplifting
sweet. It is
on
a sweet
several
ending,
levels.
yeah.
Yeah. It's a sweet ending. Like, pretty much everything that happens in the last 15 minutes of the movie is just sweet.
Yes. The bad guys get theirs. The good guys triumph, even if that triumph is primarily a moral victory and not a practical one.
Indeed. Speaking of the moral victory and not the practical one, do we want to talk about the thematic stuff, since we're kind of edging towards it anyway?
I mean, the question is, are we only talking about the things we liked? Because I don't know if that necessarily makes that list for me.
So this is the point. So this is the part where I push back at you about the opening narration, because this was one of the kind of moments of realization that I felt very proud of myself while watching the movie, was when I realized that it's Sweet Pea doing the opening narration and not Baby Doll.
Oh, okay.
You're led to think that it's Baby Doll, and it doesn't really register with you at the moment that that's definitely not Emily Browning's voice, because you don't hear Emily Browning's voice until at least 10 minutes into the movie. And then later on, when you find out, you know, the true relationship that these characters have, you realize that it's been Sweet Pea doing the narration the entire time, because Sweet Pea is actually the star of the show. And regardless of whether or not it's a good choice, I was pleased with both myself and with the movie when I had that realization.
I think I missed that realization. So
Oh, okay.
as I said this on Letterboxd, I'll be revisiting this film because I was very nervous about this viewing. It went well, and I want to dig into it more. This was more of the like proof of concept. Can I bear to actually be someone who watches Sucker Punch multiple times? And so I do want to spend some more time with this film.
Considering some of the movies that you have watched several times, I don't think this one should even register as...
Here's the thing. Journey to Bethlehem is art, and I don't think you need to say that about my viewing choices. Talking about movies where I don't know where the ironic versus unironic line lies.
Anyway, point being, we love what we love. There was a fun little game that they were playing with us at the end after Baby Doll in the film's real world has the lobotomy done. Where for the longest time, they don't show us her face. Her face is like very consciously being hidden by everything else, either because they're shooting her from the back or somebody else is in front of her face. But there's like a period of probably about 5 minutes where you can tell they're like, you really want to see her face, don't ya? Don't ya? Don't ya? Well, we're not going to show it to you. We're not going to show it to you until we're good and ready. And I knew what they were doing. And it's silly and it's corny. And I definitely loved it, I can say unironically, in that case.
You know, don't show the character's face is one of those corny tricks that always works.
It really is.
Like, I always get a little annoyed for a movie doing it because it's like, no matter how bad the movie is, if it does that, I'm like, oh, that worked. And I mean, sometimes it's Casablanca or Raiders of the Lost Ark and it's a masterpiece, and sometimes it's not a masterpiece, but it's just one of those gestures that I think just plain works. And it certainly works here. Yeah. Very, very well. I love the reveal when it shows up.
There's no reason not to pick the low-hanging fruit sometimes.
Exactly. This is a movie made, and I say this again, unironically, this is something I like about the movie. It's a movie made by a dumb guy for dumb people. And that's something I've come to love about art, especially as I've had my sort of reawakening of passion for James Cameron. Movies are a pop art form. It's okay for them to be like, we're going to press the biggest button. We're not going to be subtle. We're not going to be nuanced. We're just going to do it because like that's what you're here for. That's what I'm here for as a director. And when Zack Snyder's in that mode, I actually quite like him. Here's my dark admission that I don't think is a secret vis-a-vis Zack Snyder. I think it's great that Superman and Batman stop fighting because their moms have the same name. I love that. I don't love it ironically.
Is that why they stop fighting? I haven't seen the movie.
Oh, so you know nothing
no,
about Batman versus Superman.
I really don't.
It's literally, yes. That's literally why they stop fighting. And I'm like, that's correct. These are comic books. We're not doing a Faulkner adaptation here. Let's not pretend we are. No, I have come in the past few years, really a post-pandemic thing, I'd say, to just like dumb art. Because it's like dumb art works because we are ultimately monkeys. And it is art for monkeys.
It depends on...
God bless Zack Snyder for making it.
It depends on how it's dumb for me.
That's fair.
It has to be dumb from a place of love. Like, it has to be dumb, like, I don't know, the picture that your child draws in kindergarten or something like that. And then gives to you to put on the refrigerator.
To me, that is exactly where Zack Snyder is.
Fair enough. Very reasonable. I'm looking through just to see if there's anything I missed. I wrote down trench warfare feels like laser tag, which I also consider absolutely a good with regards to this. Yes, this is one of the things that I wrote down. This feels like a video game movie for people who like watching other people play video games.
It feels like specific video games to me, and I reread my very unpleasant and angry review. I called out specifically a Star Wars video game, Shadow of the Empire, and there's a lot of Star Wars video game in this. Like, there's like fighting with planes and shooting monsters with your planes, and like this all feels very not just Star Wars, but like very much the genre of, because it's a genre unto itself, Star Wars video game.
I believe it. The game that I kept thinking of was Bayonetta.
Sure.
I kept thinking of it in particular because it is a game that I don't know this, but I'm going to assume that it was played primarily by men, because most such video games are played primarily by men, who are then playing in the guise of like a comically sexualized female protagonist. And the game is very aware that the protagonist is comically sexualized. And that's both part of the appeal and also like part of the, I don't know, meta commentary, which is exactly what's going on here.
It's a perfect comparison because, yeah, Bayonetta is very much drawing your attention to being the kind of person who plays a game in which a woman in like 9-inch tall heels kicks things.
And a suit made entirely of her hair that she takes off every time she fights a boss.
So like, and I mean, we are at some point going to have to get into talking about the themes because they're there. But no, like the line between this art is indulging in a fetish and this art is commenting on fetishes is one that Sucker Punch is trying very hard to call attention to.
Very much so.
And no, Bayonetta is a perfect comparison for that.
Yeah. And also, like, just because I am not good at video games, like, I enjoy playing them every so often, but my hand-eye coordination is too bad to be good at anything other than point-and-click adventures. But I do really like watching other people, mostly my husband, play video games, because I still like the experience. And this felt in a lot of ways like, oh, this is a video game I don't have to play.
No, that makes sense to
Like,
me.
it is very much structured like a video game. I still feel like I'm having the experience of playing through the video game, but I don't have to do anything.
And it's the kind of movie where it's easier to describe its major act breaks as levels rather than like scenes or sequences.
Very much so.
There's the orc level, and there's the trench warfare level, and there's the Buddhist temple level, right?
Yep, and there's the dragon level, which I guess is
that's-
also part of the orc level.
He's the boss
but
of
you have
the
to
orc
fight
level,
the dragon.
exactly.
Yes. I think she's the boss
No,
of the orc level.
that's a very good point. That's a very good
I
point.
think because that's the mom
the
dragon
entire point of the scene.
whose baby they murdered.
Yes. Which
I might...
also a little bit of meta commentary in there that it like clearly wants you to feel bad when the dragon dies. Both of them.
It absolutely does. It has the mom dragon, like, nuzzling the corpse of her baby.
Right?
And that was the saddest that I felt at any time during
Pretty
this
much.
movie. So, yeah, there is so much going on here. And there are some themes.
There are some themes. Do you want to tackle the themes?
Do I want to tackle the themes?
The thing about the themes, it's easier to tell what they are because Zack Snyder extensively has talked about this movie to the press than because those
Has
themes
he? I guess I'm not surprised.
can be grabbed out of the movie. But maybe you got them out of the movie.
I bet he really wants to defend this movie. This feels like a movie he'd be very eager to save from its place of shame.
He's also just in general someone who's extremely transparent about what his movies are.
Fair enough.
This is why we know in such detail what would be in the director's cut that has not yet been made.
Fair enough. So the theme of the movie that I liked, and we have been saying themes in the plural, but the theme that resonated the most with me for this one was the one that kind of comes into stark view after this movie's version of the big reveal, which is like Baby Doll has this realization. She has been told that there are 4 things that they have to get, and then there's a 5th thing, and she'll know what the 5th thing is when it's time. And I will say that immediately when this was said, I was like, she's going to have to sacrifice herself. Mm-hmm. And as it turned out, that's what it was. But the way that it was handled was that Baby Doll has this kind of realization that she is only a supporting player in this story. Like, it's as though she has now realized that she is a character in a story and she is not the main character. Sweet Pea is the main character. And so in order for any of them to escape, and at this point it can only be Sweet Pea because the other 3 girls are dead, she has to be the one who sacrifices herself so that Sweet Pea can get out. And so I really did kind of resonate with the theme of, and it's not an unexplored theme at this point of everybody is kind of the hero of their own story, and you're a supporting character in somebody else's story. But it felt like one of the things the movie was kind of getting at was like, remember the supporting characters in your story and like understand what the supporting characters are going through on your behalf, because you can in fact never do anything alone like this. Because it's basically reframing it as the entire movie being retold from the point of view of the supporting actress in the story, and reframing the support staff as the hero of the story. And, like, I don't think that's anything especially profound, but especially given that we're in the sweet section of the movie at this point, I thought it was sweet.
No, I like that a lot. I hadn't thought about it in quite those terms, but hearing you describe it sort of makes me want to put the movie like in dialogue with Mad Max Fury Road, which is a movie in which there is no singular hero. The protagonist of the movie is a group of several people working for each other. And I do feel like there's a little bit of that, and we kind of danced around it a little bit, but like none of the characters really emerges as a concrete personality. They're all types. They don't have a lot to say. But they do sort of emerge collectively as the protagonist, in that their job is to resist the terrible predations of the villains. And I like that. I like that sort of sense of like, that everyone is the hero of their own story. I like, as you said, I like that, the way it manifests here.
Mad Max Fury Road was another movie title that I wrote down over the course of
Excellent.
watching this. You have anything else that we haven't covered regarding Sucker Punch?
Certainly theme-wise, I think what is annoying to me about the film, if we can make that shift.
You can.
Thank you. So Zack Snyder's whole big thing was that this was a film about resisting the male gaze, essentially. And that he deliberately made these hypersexualized fetish object characters in an unironic way, and that he found them all sexy and he put them in costumes that he thought was sexy. But the goal was to make you feel sort of awkward and bad about having a film that essentially consisted of nothing other than sexy girls fighting dragons, sexy girls fighting, Nazis. The goal was to sort of call attention to the ridiculous of that being a way that movies get made. And I think that's a very valid project. I think Zack Snyder does not have the finesse to make it work. And so to me, there's a lot of the only reason that this isn't just looking at sexy girls in costumes is because you told me before I got into the theater that I should feel bad for doing that. And I don't know, it feels clunky to me when it's the Zack Snyder's dumb thing, but also the dark side of that, Zack Snyder wants to be smart. James Cameron doesn't. James Cameron's just like, I'm going to make a whole movie about a planet, and then basically the theme is dads protect their kids. Zack Snyder wants to have this kind of very complicated story about fans and gaze theory and sort of translating fetishes into art, and he's just not deft enough to make that interesting, I think. So the parts of the movie where it's trying to really engage with that feel kind of clumsy to me.
So I suppose as the non-owner of a male gaze, I can't really speak to what it does with that. But I will say, through my own gaze, I think it's fun to watch sexy girls fight dragons.
And I will say, I have my own thoughts about the theory of the male gaze that are not necessarily the standard ideas about the theory.
Fair enough.
I think it is a useful idea that has been turned into a law in a way that is not good. And Snyder certainly thinks it's a law, is I guess what I'm saying.
Understood. Yeah. Again, I still think it's fun to watch sexy girls fight dragons.
I mean, it
and storm castles.
Is the thing.
Yeah, it is. And I think the movie still acknowledges that.
Yeah.
I don't know if the movie meant to acknowledge that. Well, but it certainly does.
I think the movie's a little confused because Zack Snyder's not... he's not clever enough to make the movie have its cake and eat its too. So he's kind of like having the cake and then talking about, wow, this is really shitty cake while he's having his third slice.
Good metaphor.
Thank you.
But yeah, I think that I prefer to just embrace the themes that I enjoyed and ignore the ones that I think are...
Best way to engage with art.
Indeed. Best way to engage with art. All right, anything else that we haven't covered?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've talked about most everything from a fairly positive view, and I think it would have been possible for less sort of urgently charitable, shall we say, viewers to have said meaner things about the things we've already covered. But
indeed. I get the impression that quite a bit of mean ink has been spilled about this movie.
Oh, yes.
And again, we don't really need to spill any more.
It's a movie that was received with virulent hostility in 2011, including by me.
All right, so this is the point in each episode where I will briefly, because we don't need to have another conversation about it, reveal what I actually thought about the movie, because up to this point I will have been rapturous about whatever movie it is. So for Sucker Punch, I liked it. I did. It was an enjoyable experience. It is emphatically not a movie for me.
Sure.
Yeah.
It is a movie for me, and I liked it.
Oh, very much so. You know our disparate feelings on Mad Max Fury Road. I am on record as saying that Mad Max Fury Road is an excellent example of a kind of movie that I do not like.
Yes.
So, like, I like it as much as I'm ever going to, and there is a cap on how much I will ever like it, because I am easily bored by big, long action set pieces.
Sure.
I was bored by the big, long action set pieces here.
Well, that's one of my big problems. Certainly in the extended cut, which is what you and I watched, the film is too long.
It is. It is. I don't think I would have cut the same things that were cut.
Agreed.
From the theatrical release, from the sound of it, but I definitely would have cut some of it.
I feel like every one of the music videos, action set pieces, levels, whatever we want to describe them, every one of them is at least 5 minutes too long.
Yes, very much so. But the stuff in between the big action set pieces, I really did genuinely like.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know what the bug everybody had up their butts was in 2011.
I think, again, that Zack Snyder was making a whole big show about, like, this is feminist art, and you watch it and it's like, it's not. And it's okay that it's not, but it's not okay that you said it was before you showed it to everybody.
Yeah, that was inviting the discourse upon yourself, and you just shouldn't do that.
Because, again, I think he wants to be a smart director that people talk about, but he's not. He's the guy who makes 6 hours worth of Star Wars knockoff for Netflix.
Yes. Directors should shut up about their own movies.
They should.
Is generally my feeling about this. Once you have released the movie into the world, it is not yours anymore. It belongs to the public. The public gets to do what they want with it.
Firmly agree with that as a strategy. And again, it is a particular failing of Zack Snyder that he cannot do that. He has to have, like, so much that he wants to tell us about every one of his films.
He has to go talk about it, and he has to explain the movie, and no, stop explaining the movie, just let it exist. It will be fine. It will be okay if everybody doesn't get exactly what you wanted them to get out of it.
Exactly.
But it is not the kind of movie that I see myself racing out to watch again, but I do not regret having seen it the one time.
I will be revisiting the extended cut. I do not imagine I'll ever revisit the theatrical cut. I don't think I'll be doing it soon. It is quite long, and it's just fun. I don't think it really has any meat on its bones, whatever Zack Snyder wanted.
No, I don't think...
It's the kind of fun that other movies are better.
I don't think the whole, like, multi-layer fantasy world structure is ever entirely successful. It is interesting, but I don't think it's ever successful.
I would agree. It feels to me like an excuse for doing the stuff he wanted to put in his movie, but it's very much a film full of standalone incidents that has struggled very badly to stitch those incidents into an actual, in our case, 2 hour and 10-minute narrative.
Yeah, so some of the parts, maybe not great, but I do like an awful lot of the parts.
Agreed. And that's where I would say I'm at as well.
Yes. So thank you for this assignment on this maiden voyage for this podcast.
I'm pleased for both of us. I did not know what to expect at all. I'm pleased for both of us that we both ended up more or less enjoying the film. More than not, I think. Me
too. And so for those of you out there in listener land, this will be happening every month. Next time I will have a new guest host. Don't know who it's going to be yet, but it'll probably be another familiar voice, since it's a podcast. If you have a thought for movies that you would like to force me to love, drop them in the comments, and maybe one of the future guest hosts will see them there and be inspired.
And don't forget, next Tuesday will be the second Tuesday of the month. That means a movie roundtable hosted by myself with several guests. We're still deciding what the topic's going to be, but in honor of Valentine's Day, it will probably have something to do with romantic cinema. So be sure to check that out next week. Some new faces and some old friends will be coming to that episode.
All right, that does sound lovely. So I hope you liked the show, and I hope you'll be back with me next month for whatever somebody forces me to say is great. But it will be okay, because all movies are great, even the bad ones. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll check in with you next time.